Bill got bored a little there on the 26th year, about a couple of months.
When was it?
Didn't you get bored of those about 26 years?
No, it wasn't.
You got bored with that physical ailment. But after the 26th year, when you got spelled and really got a chance to really read deep thinking.
I have stayed away from this book for a while. It's like letting your acreage lie fallow. That's right. Then I come back to it. Yes, too much of this is like too much of anything. I've let this sit for a couple of years ago. I don't anymore now because we have the book and I'm perambulating around. It's beautiful. Now let's see where.
Dog. Oh, that's what's in the
Where is Bud?
Bud or Collins and Bill said it was dog.
Yeah, after a while you get used to it and you can live with it.
That's my idea.
I would like to ask something. I'm not taking issue, but I would like to have a more explanation on the word static that you use. It's always been one of my pet things, but nothing to be static in relative to the stagnate. And you use the word static in a different way than I've ever had it used before, I've heard it used before, as being a very living kind of thing. And static, I have said perfection to me as far as I can see the fact. You could be static or it was stagnate.
I think your statement is practically correct. I've used this in connection with God, not in connection with anything
that's
like it is.
It's a different way than I've ever thought of it before.
I think that would be true of any creature or of any sub-absolute being. They couldn't be static. It has to be God. You stick to your concept. Yeah. Only God could be static and still grow. Because He is infinite. He is God. The rules just don't apply there.
That really showstopper for me for a minute.
Here,
We're going along there because that just blew everything I'd taught all the people.
Well, let me show you something here. You don't realize what you've been into. Turn to page 2.
That's where I belong.
Oh,
that's what I like.
That's a nice way to start.
And look down a little bit to near the bottom of the top third of the page. About paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. Deity functions on personal, pre-personal, and superpersonal levels. Forget that. Total deity is functioning on the following 7 levels. 1, static. Self-contained and self-existent deity. Now you know how to say that anymore, right? 2, potential. Self-willed and self-purposed deity. 3, associated. Self-personalized and divinely fraternal deity.
And I have a little note, but I've never gone back and
Right. Now this is our whole story of the Zero Age is an exploration of just those 3 sentences.
I have written down a few days here sometime.
3 sentences, that's all I was talking about. Only I want to go back to static in our first prologue. Because there's something that is bigger than all of this. And I use the term the infinite. And the infinite is revealed to me as God. Right. He's the underlying principle. And this is what we're seeking for. And that's what I'm trying to distill out of this book. The story that's implied in this book, which you can interpolate and extrapolate from what they say, without anything freakish or bizarre, just reasonable reason. It tells me that the quest of quests is the attempt to find this infinite. I'm convinced I never will. I'm also convinced I will never be stopped. These 2 conclusions I've reached. I never will find the infinite, but nothing will ever stop me in this quest.
I know I will understand it. But I'm going to find
I know where I want to go. Whether I ever get there, or not, it's really immaterial. As long as I don't get stopped in my...
You will never be stopped. You have the equipment. When I analyzed, I got laid up for 6 weeks of laryngitis. And for 6 weeks I sat at a typewriter. I found out the perfect way to work was to sleep twice a day and work twice a day. So you're fresh twice instead of once. And well, I slept mornings and I slept early evenings. And I worked afternoons and I worked from midnight on.
Quiet thing.
Oh God, yes. And you finally get to the place where you've moved on in concept to where you can think in an area. And I analyze what kind of growth is going to take place on the whole natural universe system. This is post-ultimate growth, or absolute growth. I analyze the conditions. Then I analyze what kind of equipment the human beings have.
And you in particular, because you were doing it?
No, anybody. Anybody does it.
Everybody doing this?
Right. And human beings have got two things. They get two priceless possessions. They get them both from God. Number one, your personality. Our personality has got a potential of 7 dimensions, only 3 of which are expressible as long as we're finite creatures. 3 of them are expressible on the absolute level. That's in between. It's neither absolute nor finite. But the final dimension of human personality is capable of sub-infinite penetration of the absolute level. Now, I analyze that to mean just this. I can never encompass that level, but I can get there and keep on growing. And of course, when I say sub-infinite, I buy that. I'll never do an infinite being. But nothing is going to stop my growth. The second piece of equipment I got is this priceless fragment of God. And nothing's ever going to stop that. There's a gas tank that's never going to run empty. We can alienate it. But those two things tell me that we have the equipment right now to go the limit. There is nothing will ever stop it. And the mere fact that the goal is non-attainable doesn't bother. If you look at the last paragraph in paper 10, a wonderful old character writes this paper. He's a universal fencer, and for some reason or other, I think of an old Marine Corps colonel who's been everywhere and seen everything, including delirium training. Marine Corps colonel. And he's talking about what they're telling the boys in boot training camp, about how far you can go, And starting at the bottom of page 116, he said, it may be possible that the finalizers will partially attain the deity absolute. But even if they should, still in the eternity of eternity, the problem of the universal absolute, that's that middle lane, will continue to intrigue, mystify, baffle, and challenge the ascending and progressing finality, for we perceive that the unfathomability of the cosmic relationships of the universal absolute will tend to grow in proportions as the material universes and their spiritual administration continue to expand. In other words, you're trying to encompass something which is growing faster than you're growing. And then, only infinity can disclose the Father in.
That's taking me before that back and looking at it. It's like a dog trying to catch its tail.
Or it's like rowing, chasing a motorboat. It doesn't mean you're not making progress. And it also doesn't mean that the gap isn't getting worse all the time. But that's all right. That's all right. We're still making progress. And if we ever came to the end of the road, then we would have arrived at the static affair, which is not for creatures.
We cannot be, doesn't it?
This is not for creatures.
That's what I was going to say. While I was reading, I thought, well, there it is again.
Certainly.
We can't, we would become static if we reached that goal and we were to carry it.
Right. When people present a static condition as a goal, then you come to the eschatology of Hinduism and Buddhism, Southern Buddhism, Nirvana, where you unite with the Absolute, or the Oversoul, and then you lose individuality. This is the union of a drop of water with the ocean. And from there on out, you can't say what this person is. All you can say is what he isn't.
He's not a person.
He is not a person, he is not a person. He is not alive, he is not dead. He is not conscious, he is not unconscious. Or to use two Sanskrit words, which I've learned, nita nata, with not this, not that. So I don't buy something which can be described only in terms of negative. This describes something in terms of positive.
Yeah, you might find some personality referred to in the book
It's a fourth reality. It's not matter, it's not mind, it's not spirit, but it is real. And I use this illustration in one of the appendices. No one has ever seen red. Red is a concept, but not a reality. We know red, we perceive red only when we perceive something which is red. Neither will anyone ever perceive personality as such. We will perceive personality only when we encounter someone who is a person. Personality is pure quality with no quantity whatsoever, whereas matter, mind, and spirit differ in quality and are also quantitative realities. Example, in paper 12 on the universe of universes, when they discuss their computations of gravity, they can compute the quantitative output of material gravity, mind gravity, spirit gravity, but personality gravity is non-computable. Mathematics won't touch it because there's no quantity to deal with, just quantity. Personality is something which God gives to living creatures and which does two things to them. First, it puts them in the personality circle, which is an independent, direct relationship to God, independent of the law of God. And second, these creatures are forever liberated from slavish response to antecedent causation. They don't just fall over like dominoes when the next domino hits them, which would be characteristic of a piece of machinery or a subpersonal thing. A creature has choice, not absolute choice, but relative choice. And my favorite illustration is you can't decide not to have wrinkles in your face, but you can choose which kind you want to have, from frowning or from smiling. That is a choosable proposition. I think of choice, real choice, I don't mean trivial choice, I'll have some coffee, that's a choice. No, that's another choice. But these are such casual choices.
They're
Insignificant choices. Correct. But I think the significant choices, as taking place in human life, is this line. Let's parallel living experience to a railroad system. When I'm on the straightaway, that's about all I can do is go down the straightaway. I don't have any situations. But every so often I pass over a switch. And every time I encounter that switch condition, I do have the possibility of choice. And I can throw that switch to the left. And these are not trivial choices. These are nature choices. Now, since I have personality, I have three visions. Yes, on page 193. I don't just have to learn everything by experimentation. Page 193, the first couple of paragraphs, I discuss this point. Because I am a person as well as a conscious being, I have reflective self-consciousness. I'd like to call that second-degree consciousness. I not only know, but I am aware of the fact that I know. This is consciousness of consciousness. And one of the byproducts of this, I think, is the ability to forecast, which is why we use a different term for animals and humans. We speak of animal behavior, but human conduct. I can, when I hit this switch, I have got a telescope or binoculars, and I can look down the road a long ways and say, well, where does this road lead to, see? And I don't have to go down the wrong siding necessarily. I can feel out the consequences of action before I take the action. So that I do not actually have to have experience with evil. I can limit this to an experience with potential evil. Jesus had a thoroughgoing experience with potential evil in his life. He had very little experience with actual evil. Very little. But always the potential was there. The stimulus to the choosing of the good was present. Again, page 52. Paragraph 2. Havana natives don't require this. Havana natives, inherently perfect beings, don't require this choice stimulus. But we do. And if we didn't have it, we couldn't see the good and differentiate it by contrast. We are aware of, to use symbolism, of the virtue of white only when we pause to consider the contrasting lack of virtue in black. We think in terms of opposites. We dichotomize in all our thinking. And these are the decisions, I think, that you make that determine progress. Now, if you're sincere, you've got good field glasses. You can look way down the road. If you're insincere, you've got warped lenses in you. You're doing a snow job on yourself. You're conning yourself. You're rationalizing beyond all normal reason. You're justifying your own ego. You are putting your ego at the center of things. And again, page 142. The only paragraph on the page. When you put your ego at the center of the personality system, you disrupt the whole cosmic plane. Because the adjuster is supposed to be at the center of that system. You just disrupt that particular human atom, that's all. Because you've disrupted the nucleus.
It could be things we discuss protecting the heart actually be using it long time.
I think you could have intellectual intrigue, be intellectually intrigued with this book and be spiritually dead. Judas comprehended, had a much better intellectual comprehension of Jesus' teaching than, say, the Alphaeus thing. But if you ask me to make a book on Judas' survival, I will quote you out that he didn't. That's my opinion. No. And I would make books that the Alphaeus twins did. At least Jesus intimated with them that there were going to be a lot of crowds that they'd be working together with in the future. He kept throwing the wrong switch. And one day, He formed a habit. And one day he just threw one wrong switch too many. We're told that up there in the mansion world, somewhere along about world number 5, we fuse with our thought adjustment. Now this does not mean that we've achieved perfection. Far from it. We have most of the paradise descent ahead of us. But it does mean that as far as this choosing business is concerned, we have made a final choice. We have no reservations left. We have chosen to find God and to attempt to do His will. And that choice has been made with such finality that it is irrevocable. Our purpose has become perfect. Our techniques leave much to be desired, I'm sure. We're awkward, we're bumbling, we say the wrong things, we get demoralized, socialized, and whatnot. We'll never knowingly throw a wrong switch again. We might inadvertently, yes, we make trouble out of ignorance, but never by design.
When all these things are designed.
Yes. Now, this works the other way, too. There are, I think, to finite creatures, there are some limits of choice. And I think as you start in the middle and you move Godward, eventually you cross a threshold. And that's when the fuses are adjusted. That recognizes the irrevocability of that last choice. You've really said it. You're never going to change it. I think you can start moving in the other direction. And I think in theological and Urantia terms, when you cross the threshold between sin and iniquity, this is the threshold in the opposite direction. You make a final choice against God that results in the final deformation of your character and being. You could never again retrace yourself. I think you can make a final choice in either direction. Somewhere down the pike, Lucifer made such a choice. Lucifer started out in the middle. Lucifer perpetrated evil, not sin. Lucifer was sincere to start with. At some point down the line, he became insincere. And this happened when he realized that his whole project was ungood. Yes. Prior to that time, he had reasoned, regardless of the consequences elsewhere, I'm doing the right thing for my system. This is a good measure for the system. We need something new. This is revolutionary. Well, this is how we make progress. But at some point down the line, he became totally disillusioned. This wasn't good for the system or Lucifer or anybody else. He stoutly maintained his position. At that point, evil translated to sin. No. I don't know. I think so. He never quite forgave Jesus for not getting John out of jail. Well, I think Peter and Andrew felt badly about it at the start, but they got over it because they loved Jesus. There wasn't anything, except for the failure to love Jesus, there was no jiggery pokery that was up that some of the others went into as well as Judas. But they loved Jesus. They were conspiring.
The other,
sure.
The other thing.
When the blue chips went down on the board, when the mud hit the fan, they were for Jesus. Remember how Thomas used to belabor him? He'd be an ass and go down there and get knocked off, to use modern parlance. And finally, when Jesus wouldn't budge, Thomas would say, all right, boys, it's crazy. So the least we can do is bow with him. Go for broke. Yes, that would be what Thomas said. Now, at some point down the line, Lucifer became disillusioned. He was offered a chance to accept mercy. He spurned it. And it says mercy is not to be trampled underfoot. Every time he spurned mercy, he did something to himself. He warped himself a little farther. Rather retrogress. Or went a little more crazy. And somewhere down the line, he crossed the threshold.
And the youth and also the thought would be I thought they're going to do
Yes. Certainly. Certainly. Well, they talk about the Lucifer Rebellion. They say this may not sound very much like a war to you. Two debates going on, Gabriel versus Lucifer. So they said this is a much more terrible war than anything you know anything about. You fight wars in terms of life temporal. This war was fought in terms of life eternal. Well, you see, this is not a mawkish universe. This is a universe that is thrillingly adventurous. And you do go for broke, and you do play for keeps. And it's a challenge. It's not a soft church luncheon with chocolate cake and cocoa and everybody smiling at each other. That's right. This has got as much challenge in it, infinitely more challenge than a war or meeting an economic threat or standing up and being counted in any difficult situation.
Well, I thought it could be our final one, where it was a matter of Gabriel and Lucifer too.
Sure.
To be a business.
Sure. And I'm mindful of what Jesus said, where he told the story of the parable of the talents. I thought about that. I thought how lucky I had been to have this book and to get it young. You know, when your mind is pliable and the concepts are easy to take in. I could work with. I didn't have to work with yarn that had been knitted once, you know what I mean? Sure. And to have aptitude to work with it. And then I thought of that parable of the talents, and I said, Buster, you better measure up. There's no royal will, there's no privileges. The more you get, the more you're going to have to account for. Yes. And my personal reaction is, I'm not a bit scared, but I feel totally challenged. Totally challenged. I just think it's going to take everything I have. Otherwise, well, what?
Well, do you ever get that quote, Jack Dragon, over it?
No.
I knew it.
That where it just kind of buries you like this in the middle, and you break out in a sweat, and you think, oh, and you hurry.
I'll tell you what I have gotten, though, and what I want to share with as many people as I can. As I worked on this story, I tried to figure out what this book is talking about. And I've learned so much that I never knew was in here before, and that's just this year. This thing is so big, so beautiful, so grand, so immense, so much bigger than I realized, and so much bigger than I probably now realize. But how could you miss an excursion like this one?
What age was you?
Color language has progressed, you know. The flying today would be... No?
But I had like me, did I think every philosophy I think the same place, you know, stagnated.
I've been down those roads too. No, because they don't know the way out. They get caught in cul-de-sac. Well, blind, Box Canyon.
I could do nothing about this this I don't think so.
No, when you take inventory, it's the inevitability. If we're going to have courage, then we have to come up against hardships and disappointment. If we're going to be altruistic, then we've got to encounter situations of social inequality. If we're going to have hope, then we have got to live with insecurity and recurrent uncertainty. If we're going to know what faith really is, then we're going to have to know less than we can believe. We're never going to be able to prove things. If we really have got to fall in love with the truth, then we've got to have a thoroughgoing experience of error and falsehood. if we're going to become real idealists, then we must encounter situations that are not good and not beautiful to stimulate our reach for better things. If we're going to find out what it's really like to be loyal, we've got to face the potential of cowardice, betrayal, and default, and look it right in the eye. If we want to be unselfish, then we've got to live all our lives with an animalistic and belligerent self that wants ego expression. And if we want to really find out how sweet pleasure is, we must know pain as a contrast. Now this to me is not for fantasy. Yeah. I've mentally visualized this. I get a lot of this stuff down to very simple symbols to feel it. And I see Ellis Island, where you check in. And if Peter ran the show, that'd be all right with me too. It's actually a big archway there. It's a port of entry. And on each of the columns supporting this arch is a brown tablet, one on each column. On one it says, no panty waste need apply. On the other one it says, we don't want any SOBs either. Now that's a nice distinction to go down the middle of that road and avoid either ditch. In talking to executives in business, I've portrayed my ideal of a businessman is a man who's wonderfully hard in the head, exquisitely soft in the heart, and has got the two pulling together in harness. This is a very great guy to work for, or to work with. But believe me, if he's soft in the head, he doesn't last very long. And if he's soft in the heart, how can you have any loyalty for him? Hard in the heart. But I find men like this, they are hard-headed and soft-hearted. Yes. They're wise. They're wisely sympathetic. They're never soft, but always kind. And sometimes kindness means being tough. I like to associate those two with the pedigree that they give us over on page 290 and 91. And so when you get to Havana, you've got just one aspect of perfection. Perfection of purpose. As far as your purpose is concerned, you have obeyed the Father's command. Be ye perfect, even as I am perfect. Nothing is going to upset you for long. I mean, you really believe. You've tested this thing. But in getting there, and jump over to the next page, to the third paragraph. Long before reaching Havana, these offended children of time have learned to feast upon uncertainty, to fatten upon disappointment, to enthuse over apparent defeat, to invigorate in the presence of difficulty, to exhibit indomitable courage in the face of immensity, and to exercise unconquerable faith when confronted with the challenge of the inexplicable. Long since, the battle cry of these pilgrims became, in liaison with God, nothing, absolutely nothing, is impossible. Now, this again is no theorizing. These people are wearing experiential campaign ribbons by the time they get there. And they got the battle scars and scars of veterans. I've often thought, let me read you about my patient singing here. If the Rancher Brotherhood should ever become Roman Catholic, I'd adopt this guy as my personal saint. Huh? Oh, of course. Of course it's been. You see, my problem wasn't Lucifer. my problem was the problem of faith and wisdom.
Your faith and your wisdom.
Yes. It always seemed to me that when you accepted the religion, you tied a bandage around your eyes, and you put out your hands, and you said, Credo Credomus, and the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord, I will trust in God. And stop thinking, you know?
That's all I made.
Yeah. And even after I had these papers, I accepted them with reservation. This is 7:55. Until I read this story. And all of a sudden, this ceased to be a problem. Now, I think they could have written dissertation after dissertation about the relationship of faith and wisdom, but the story of Van was worth 100 pages of preaching. Shortly after Satan's inspection, and when the planetary administration was on the eve of the realization of great things on Urantia, one day, midwinter of the northern continent, Caligastia, planetary prince, held a prolonged conference with his associate, Dalagastia, after which the latter called the 10 councils of Urantia in session extraordinary. This assembly was opened with a statement that Prince Caligastia was about to proclaim himself absolute sovereign of Urantia, and demanded that all administrative groups abdicate by resigning all of their functions and powers into the hands of Dalagastia as trustees, pending the reorganization of the planetary government and the subsequent redistribution of these offices of administrative authority. Closely considered, there are 100 members of the prince's corporeal staff. They were the link between human beings and the invisible prince. They could see both ways. These 100 were all ex-mortals, 50 ex-men and 50 ex-women, one from each of the other planets in the local system. Well, from each of 100 other planets. None from this world and no two from any other one. They'd all died, survived, gone through the mansion world, were citizens on Jerusalem, had not yet used for their justice. Of course, it could happen, you know, but it happens on the fifth mansion world as average. It could happen much later, and it does in many cases. And they were selected from among, I presume, a very large number who volunteered to come down here on the Urantia adventure. They had gotten as far as Lucifer, sovereign of the local system. They knew Satan, his executive officer. They knew planetary princes, secondarily mounted. They knew nothing beyond the system. The highest authority they'd had personal dealings with was the system power. They're back down here. They don't have their adjusters with them, so the adjusters won't work on a descending mission, only in connection with the ascent. The adjusters are standing by. They're superhuman beings because they have an evolution of soul which is post-mortal. We have embryonic souls. Their souls have gone on growing all through the seven-mansion world and on Jerusalem for some unknown length of time. So that while they're corporeal, they are really superhuman. This soul is a reality. It's got mind and thinks. The presentation of this astounding demand was followed by the masterly appeal of Van, chairman of the Supreme Council of Coordination. This distinguished administrator and able jurist branded the proposed course of Caligastia as an act bordering on planetary rebellion and appealed to his confreres to abstain from all participation until an appeal could be taken to Lucifer, the system sovereign of Satanius, and he won the support of the entire staff. Now, if he had had a bandage around his eyes, he would have simply said, yes, of course. This is his superior that's issuing the order. Accordingly, appeal was taken to Jerusalem, and forthwith came back the orders designating Caligastia as supreme sovereign on Urantia and commanding absolute and unquestioning allegiance to his mandate. Now again, this is backing up from the highest authority that Van has had any personal contact with, or that any of these 100 have dealt with. He's checked with the Home Office. And the Home Office, as the regional vice president, has this authority. Don't argue with it. And it was in reply to this amazing message that the noble Van made his memorable address of 7 hours length. I'm going to listen to the tape of that someday. In which he formally drew his indictment of Delegastia, Telegastia, and Lucifer as standing in contempt of the sovereignty of the universe of Nebadon, and the appeal to the Most Highest of Edentia for support and confirmation.
You went to higher court.
Yes. Meantime, the system circuits had been severed. Urantia was isolated. Every group of celestial life on the planet found itself suddenly and without warning isolated, utterly cut off from all outside counsel and insight. Delegastia formally proclaimed Caligastia as god of Urantia and supreme over all. With this proclamation before them, the issues were clearly drawn, and each group drew off by itself and began deliberations, discussions destined eventually to determine the fate of every superhuman personality on the planet. Skip a paragraph. For more than 7 years, this struggle continued. Not until every personality concerned had made a final decision, would or did the authorities of Edentia interfere or intervene. Not until then did Van and his loyal associates receive vindication and relief from their prolonged anxiety and intolerable suspense. 7 years.
And I think then the problem Van had was other entities.
Now, to me, that simply unlocks the door to religion. I'm not afraid of it. I can realize that religion is not a subtraction. It's an augmentation. But of course you've got to redefine religion. That took guts. Chill, real guts. As the papers go on to say, Van's appeal got to Edentia, and they promptly replied to it. Vindicated. But the circuits were cut while it was on its way here, and it was marooned in a relay energy transfer for 200,000 years. And it was during the time of the presentation of these papers that they got it out. And this is Van's final technical clearance. Now this is the sort of thing that I think characterizes the universe in which we live. It's not an easy universe. Fair, but not easy. It's kind, but not soft. It's loving, but not mawkish. It engenders happiness, but not content. And I would personally differentiate those words in this light. Contentment is like a cow, standing up to his pretty far in high grass, munching his herd, munching peacefully and giving milk contentedly. Happiness to me is inseparable from growth. Growth means some change. Change means adjustment. Adjustment means turmoil. Turmoil means change. And it is the content of change in the overall of happiness that gives it its sequences and forever separates it from contentment, which has about as much personality appeal. It engenders happiness, but not contentment. And I would personally differentiate those words in this light. Contentment is like a cow, standing up to his pretty far in high grass, munching his what? Her, munching peacefully and giving milk contentedly. Happiness to me is inseparable from growth. Growth means some change. Change means adjustment. Adjustment means turmoil. Turmoil means change. And it is the content of change in the overall of happiness that gives it its sequences and forever separates it from contentment, which has about as much personality appeal as cold pebbles.
In other words, you would agree, I think, I wouldn't give you thanks.
No, that's right. People might also agree. I find well-adjusted people to be supremely boring.
Yep.
Maladjusted people have tensions that they're trying to resolve, and they're going places in the resolution of those tensions. A little neuroticism, I think, is good for people. And if any of you folks are well-adjusted, all I have to say is don't brush it off on me. I'm not going away.
Well, the doctor said not long ago, we don't need more tranquilizers, we need details.
That's right.
I look like
Details. Little tranquilizers. Or D-double-O. Double-O.
D-double-L.
What class?
I got it.
Huh?
I was merely spelling details.
Oh.
As I would insist. Well, there's another way too, D-U-E.
I'm familiar with that.
This 7 years of waiting was a time of heart-searching and soul-discipline. Such crises in the affairs of the universe demonstrate the tremendous influence of mind as a factor in spiritual choosing. Education, training, and experience are factors in most of the vital decisions of all evolutionary moral creatures. But it is entirely possible for the indwelling spirit to make direct contact with the decision-determining powers of the human personality, so as to empower the fully consecrated will of the creature to perform amazing acts of loyal devotion to the will and the way of the Father in paradise. And this is just what occurred in the experience of Amadon, the modified human associate of Van. Amadon was a native here on Earth. Amadon is the outstanding human hero of the Lucifer Rebellion. This male descendant of Andon and Fata was one of the 100 who contributed life plasm to the Prince's staff. And ever since that event, he had been attached to Van as his associate and human assistant. Amadon elected to stand with his chiefs throughout the long and trying struggle. And it was an inspiring sight to behold this child of the evolutionary races standing unmoved by the sophistries of Delegastu, while throughout the 7-year struggle, he and his loyal associates resisted with unyielding fortitude all of the deceptive teachings of the brilliant Caligastia. Caligastia, with a maximum of intelligence and a vast experience in universe affairs, went astray, embraced sin. Amadon, with a minimum of intelligence and utterly devoid of universe experience, remained steadfast in the service of the universe and in loyalty to his associates. Van utilized both mind and spirit in a magnificent and effective combination of intellectual determination and spiritual insight, thereby achieving an experiential level of personality realization of the highest attainable order. Mind and spirit, when fully united, are potential for the creation of superhuman values, even Morancha realities. Page 762. At the time of these momentous transactions, I was stationed on Edentia, and I am still conscious of the exhilaration I experienced as I perused the Salvington broadcast, which told from day to day of the unbelievable steadfastness, the transcendent devotion, and the exquisite loyalty of this one-time, semi-savage, springing from the experiential, from the experimental and original stock of the Andonic race. From Edentia up through Salvington and even on to Uversa, for 7 long years. The first inquiry of all subordinate celestial life regarding the Satania rebellion ever and always was, what of Amadon of Urantia? But he still stands, unmoved. And all of this is a beautifully touching and superbly magnificent illumination of the wisdom of the Father's universal plan for mobilizing the core of mortal finality on Paradise and for recruiting this vast group of mysterious servants of the future, largely from the common clay of the mortals of ascending procession, just such mortals as the impregnable Amadon. This to me is I think the yardstick of survival and progression. I think every human being, somewhere along the line, either old piecemeal or maybe in some crisis, faces a decision, which is just as challenging to him as these decisions were to man and Amadon. I think every recruit has to prove itself. Now, I'm mindful that decisions would vary, they'd be fair. Jesus never told the Alphaeus twins to feed his sheep, he told them to be good fishermen. He told Peter to be a good shepherd. The difference in his admonition to the 12 is a classic example of his statement of the future more is expected from the student and of the master more than of the servant. This thing is done with exquisite fairness. But I think it's proportional. I think everybody gets challenged 100%, whatever that may be. Sure, it's your challenge. Sure. The guy that had 5 talents, he doubled them. It was par for the course. He expected it. But the vice president that put it in the face of the father's box gets fired. That's my favorite story in here, because it meant the most to me when I read it. It answered the one question that I never had anyone answer up until, and I now know that there's no bandage. No, except you think there are.
Sometimes it's harder to do. Well, it is harder to do because you stand quiet for 7 minutes while all this stuff is going on. And you're patient and believe you they're not letting break your name.
That's murder. Just murder.
I've just been through one for a year and a half.
7 months.
I know. That I even bad at sometimes where I've done the right thing. And you know, I'm still hard-headed. And then there was something that just gave me the courage and I keep on. And now, I see what's going on. the crop is coming up, or,
Now you got a minute.
boy, it's going to be nice, it's a problem, you know, boy, it's on the front, I mean, see, this is a little perfect, but it does work.
I tell you where I think it helps to have humor. You see, if you're going to have that kind of courage, you could also be very paranoid. Now, they think they're right, too.
But they know they're right.
They know they're right. Again, you're walking a crown road that's slippery. And there's the ditch of default, and there's the ditch of ego exaltation on the other side. And neither one of which is particularly desirable. How can you have courage without being a fathead? You know what I mean? To be courageous without being bullheaded. To be willing to choose your conviction without being a paranoid about it. And I believe that the vital ingredient there is humor. Can you stand off and laugh at yourself? Huh? Yeah. I don't think you
Not
can.
completely.
You can't be completely, but you can do it partially. And if you're not taking yourself seriously in the process, I'd say this is pretty good evidence that you're not paranoid. If you're taking yourself seriously, I think you're in jeopardy.
You know, it's sort of, Bill, I mean, if you take on serious, it gets back to getting the feeling of success. Well, relative, and to me, it's success is you having so-called success revolution themselves, doesn't get up and down again.
Yeah.
That's what it is. What you did just right along the same trail. It's like a feeling. At the end of the picture, I'm giving it or getting it.
That's right.
I kind of like it.
Well, this is, again, if I had a thing, she'd be mine. When we have a break, when do we quit this, Mr. President?
You are...
No. He was the Chief Justice of the Planetary Supreme Court, though. He had a good legal mind. Those aptitudes he had. Van's group, his 10, were approved by the Constellation Authority. And they picked Van as being a real lawyer. Van had a good legal mind. I think that's why he held that commanding post. I should think so. Well, anyway. I think it was reasoning plus spiritual insight. You know, but he had a soul which had grown to superhuman proportions. Van was more than a human being. Van was a human being as a citizenship status on Jerusalem. Let's say it takes 700 years to go through the mansion world. 100 years on each world, that's not unreasonable. I wouldn't get bored in 100 years on the world. Would you?
I'll tell you more about that about 8 minutes.
All right. And then he'd been on Jerusalem from indefinite length of time. Let's say Van was 1,000 years old. Compare any one of us with 1,000 years of experience behind us as compared with ourselves today. And we would be, even if we just lived down here as mortals, we'd have a lot on the ball that we couldn't possibly have today. Yeah, that's right. He was presented with a superhuman challenge, but he was a superhuman being. And I'd say the challenge was proportionate to his aptitudes and his capacity. Amadon couldn't have met the challenge without the adjuster, and thank the Lord he had an adjuster who helped him when he needed help. You get help You get help when you've earned it. And the most precise description of when they're able to help you and will is given in the story of Andar and Fonda. It was very important that those first two human beings get away from the ancestral tribe. But nobody could help them until they decided to flee. Now that was their decision. And then the life carriers gave them the one concept they needed, north. They had no map. They decided to flee, and the life carriers supplied them with the sense of the correct direction to flee in.
And then also, thinking about it, you have to be aware that you need help.
Yeah.
Before you can make a decision that will lead away from that.
Right. And you have to exhaust your resources. When you've exhausted your resources, if you merit help, then I'm sure you get it. This I just don't doubt. You may not be conscious of the help, but you get it.
Sometimes you're unconscious.
Correct? No, here I'm a real believer. If I ever need help, and I've been diligent, and my gas tank is empty, I'm going to get a full tank of gas for whatever it takes to get out of that picklement. Now that doesn't mean that I'll be helped out of a physical jam, but out of a spiritual jam, yes.
Sometimes it's an idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, before we get into humor, they promised us this. And just so many words in here. On page 383, last paragraph. Having started out on the way of life everlasting, having accepted the assignment and received your orders to advance, do not fear the dangers of human forgetfulness and mortal inconstancy. Do not be troubled with doubts of failure or by perplexing confusion. Do not falter and question your status and standing, for in every dark hour, at every crossroad in the forward struggle, the Spirit of truth will always speak, saying, "This is the way." I think human beings are thrown supremely upon their own resources until they've exhausted those resources. But I think the whole universe will help you, if that's what it takes. When you're out of gas and haven't given up.
When you haven't given up. But
but when but
your gas tank is
surrender.
empty. You know you're out of gas. Yes, for help.
That's right. Surrender
Right.
your own will.
That's true.
Freely.
Mm-hmm.
Up until then, you use everything in your life.
It doesn't say this is your way, but this is the way. It might not be a pleasant way. Yeah, correct. 383. It's the last paragraph in the paper on the Universe Motive Spirit. That's one of the great statements in the paper, too. In every dark hour, at every crossroad in the forward struggle, the Spirit of truth will always speak.
Okay.
They use the word every twice and always once. No exception. This is the way.
How many persons
Go ahead. No, let's hear it first.
Well, I want to know how many personalities outside of the Negro system participated.
Well, there were, I've forgotten exactly, but I think there were 24 in the Nirvana Commission. And I've forgotten whether it was 12 or 24 in the commission that did cartoons. There were, I think, 12 midwayers in the commission that did part 4. That's the memory.
Well, I believe that's in part 4, but I never had bothered to count them up, and I guess you could, couldn't you?
No, I don't think that takes necessarily into consideration the authorship of the paper, because they could add anybody who write a paper. The authors of the paper don't necessarily know this information.
I see.
For example, the author of paper number 19, The Souls of Christ Meister. The chief of the evening stars of Neverland, I'm sure, was tied up in the laboratory. But he's down in a big shell here. He just wrote that paper.
That's what brought up the fourth part of that.
You turn off the machine? Both of them?
Hey,
Page 549.
549 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Paragraph 3. When we are tempted to magnify our self-importance, if we stop to contemplate the infinity of the greatness and grandeur of our Maker, our own self-glorification becomes sublimely ridiculous, even verging on the humorous. One of the functions of humor is to help all of us take ourselves less seriously. Humor is the divine antidote for exaltation of ego. To me, humor is indispensable to a healthy religious life. It says in the paper on the ministering spirits of the super universe that here on earth we grotesquely essay to measure human aptitude. And of course that's how I make my living in part. And I never let myself forget that their opinion of our professional efforts are grotesque. But we make a stab at measuring two things, among many others. One is religious motivation, the other is sense of humor. When I hit a bona fide religious fanatic, he's fanatical not because he's got too much religion, but because his humor score is nowhere nearly as good as his religious one. I've tested some very hard-headed businessmen who run a top-flight score in religion and a top-flight score in humor. They take God seriously, but they don't take themselves seriously. And I think if you want to emulate Van or Amadon, then I think you better have a sense of humor. Otherwise, you could close your mind. You could become like, if I can find it. Jesus and David are at the museum in Alexandria. And if you recall, the museum means the house of the muses. This is a university, not what we call a museum today. Learned professors here gave daily lectures, and in those times this was the intellectual center of the Occidental world. Day by day, Jesus interpreted the lectures between us. One day during the second week, the young man exclaimed, "Teacher Joshua, you know more than these professors. You should stand up and tell them the great things you told me. They are befogged by much thinking. I shall speak to my father and have him arrange it. She's a smile, saying, you are an admiring pupil, but these teachers are not minded that you and I should instruct. The pride of unspiritualized learning is a treacherous thing in human experience. The true teacher maintains his intellectual integrity by ever remaining a learner. I think one's only qualification to teach is to admit that one is a student. When you stop being a pupil, you're very quickly through as a teacher. And again, how could you do that without humor? You see, these professors have lost their sense of humor. But Jesus said, well, on page 1233, they give us their philosophy of justice in terms of adjudication. Paragraph 4. Paragraph 3. It says you have to measure up to certain standards. But if through no fault of your own, the accidents of time and the handicaps of material existence prevent your mastering these levels on your native planet, if your intentions and desires are of survival value, then there are issued the decrees of probation extension. You will be afforded additional time in which to prove yourself. If ever there is doubt as to the advisability of advancing the human identity to the nation world, the universe government invariably rule in the personal interests of that individual. They unhesitatingly advance such a soul to the status of a transitional being, while they continue their observations of the emerging Morancha intent and spiritual purpose. Thus, divine justice is certain of achievement, and divine mercy is accorded further opportunity for extending its ministry. The governments of Arvantan and Nebadan do not claim absolute perfection for the detailed working of the universal plan of mortal repersonalization, but they do claim to, and actually do, manifest patience, tolerance, understanding, and merciful sympathy. We had rather assume the risk of a system rebellion than to court the hazard of depriving one struggling mortal from any evolutionary world of the eternal joy of pursuing the ascending career. This does not mean that human beings are to enjoy a second opportunity in the face of the rejection of the first. Not at all. But it does signify that all will creatures are to experience one true opportunity to make one undoubted, self-conscious, and final choice. The sovereign judges of the universes will not deprive any being of personality status who has not finally and fully made the eternal choice. The soul of man must and will be given full and ample opportunity to reveal its true intent and real purpose. And then they don't survive. I've never talked to such a person. I don't know. I suspect he would be a rather unhappy mortal. And then I think if we turn to page 71, paragraph 2. The material self has personality and identity, temporal identity. The pre-personal spirit adjuster also has identity, eternal identity. This material personality and this spirit pre-personality are capable of so uniting their creative attributes as to bring into existence the surviving identity of the immortal soul. At first we get our personality from God, we get the adjuster from God. Having thus provided for the growth of the immortal soul, and having liberated man's inner self from the fetters of absolute dependence on antecedent causation, the Father stands aside. Now, man having thus been liberated from the fetters of causation response, at least as pertains to eternal destiny, and provision having been made for the growth of the immortal self, the soul, it remains for man himself to will the creation, or to inhibit the creation, of this surviving and eternal self, which is his for the choosing. No other being, force, creator, or agency in all the wide universe of universes can interfere to any degree with the absolute sovereignty of the mortal free will as it operates within the realms of choice regarding the eternal destiny of the personality of the choosing mortal. As pertains to eternal survival, God has decreed the sovereignty of the material and mortal will, and that decree is absolute. And on the bottom of the page, concerning those personalities who are not adjuster in God, the attribute of choice liberty is also bestowed by the universal Father, and such persons are likewise embraced in the great circuit of divine love, the personality circuit of the universal Father. God provides for the sovereign choice of all true personalities. No personal creature can be coerced into the eternal adventure. The portal of eternity opens only in response to the free will choice of the free will Son of the God of free will. Here's your charter of liberty, and also the formidable challenge. Because how could you have this liberty without accepting the consequences of its abuse? That's inescapable. You just can't have it and not have it. You either do or don't have it. If you have it, then it's up to you. And if you don't have it, then so help me, you're a piece of machinery. You're a robot. We covered survival. Bert, what did you want to talk about?
Oh, I can understand 15 times.
You want to turn this on? No, I'll take the photo off. No.
Oh, no.
There's no little cooler?
No, the girls are free.
Oh, they're not. Yeah, they just don't have to be swaddled up.
Is it the girl?
Well,
all the time.
he said there, she said there were 5 minutes just upstairs. And I know.
I was reading
You get a
about
banging on something
the
Bill says,
Chinese,
and the
they
next
discuss
time it's
temperature
plain
by
old
saying
cold.
it's the 1 Celsius, the 2 Celsius, the 3 Celsius. They get cold.
I would like for you, because I don't even know where this page is, that you are thoroughly convinced. Give some 16 statements.
Let's take it up.
Let's take it up right now and dispense with it in short order.
You find one page and get the other page in this book.
Page 7 and 8.
Have that bill and resolve it.
I hope.
One,
Now, what's the other page first?
7-11.
You mean it's conflicting?
Mhm.
Oh, I only had one.
Oh, okay.
You mean it's all right on the same page? 7-11.
I might have to go back a little bit, but I don't know what I will. Right, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the thought adjusters and andine concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And it says up here that they pray they will be indwelt.
Mm-hmm.
Then down here, it tells about their vague feeling of being something more than mere animals was due to the possession of personality and was augmented by the indwelling presence of the adjusters.
Mm-hmm.
There's archangels. I didn't say andine concept.
No, I didn't say the andine concept. When did they
Well-
get their adjusters? Do you see what I mean?
Sometime after the circuit had closed, and but probably not very long after.
All archangels prayed, and these creatures may speedily be endowed with the personal indwelling of the gift of the Spirit of the Universal Father. And then, their vague feelings. Now, read that little paragraph.
Well, it doesn't say when it was augmented, or
No, but it says that they had thought adjusters probably was the reason that they had quality of mind above some of those others.
no, it says that their vague feeling of being something more than mere animals was due to the possession of personality. Now, this has been going on for some time, and was augmented by the indwelling presence of the thought adjusters. It doesn't say when it was augmented. I think they got adjusted fairly early. They didn't have
But why
them
did they pray for them to be indwelt? Well, this is
because that's before they had adjusted. And then maybe they got it pretty
Man
soon.
mind has appeared on 606 Occitania.
Correct.
So, would you infer they didn't have adjusters when they made their first moral choice?
Now, just a minute. I'll go back to the preceding paper and put it up. Oh, yes. During the time that they lived with their animal tribe, their feeling of being something more than mere animals was due to the possession of personality and only personality. Because this whole transaction didn't take place until the day after they ran away. Go back to page 709.
Yes, I realize that.
So they got their thought adjusted
It was after they ran away that,
They got adjusted.
But go back to the very first paragraph and read what all this quote is. Like I said,
Now take page 709, last paragraph. At noon the day after the runaway of the twins, there occurred the initial test flash of the universe circuit signal at the planetary reception filter. They were all astir. On the third day after the elopement of the twins and before the life carrier cord departed, they arrived at Nebulan Archangel with initial planetary circuit establishment. Now, 3 days after they ran away, they didn't have thought adjusters, because that's when this statement was made. At some time thereafter, they got adjusters. And when they got adjusters, that augmented their feeling of being something other than animals. Prior to that time, it was merely the possession of personality. I think the sequence is fairly close to this.
well, this intimated to me that, that they realized they were something more than their ancestors.
That's right.
And they ran away.
That's correct.
And they realized they were something more than their ancestors because they had personality and thought adjustment.
No, just
But they
personality.
didn't. But they pray up here for them to get a thought adjustment.
Yeah. While they were living with the Primetes tribe, I think it was the fact that they were persons that made them feel different. For example, they communicated more widely. They built better. They amplified. And they couldn't always keep their associate their immediate presence. And that was personality in us. Then they ran away, and 3 days later this prayer was issued. And at some time thereafter, on the Trek North, I would say, they got it.
The archangels got answers to their prayer that speedily they didn't have. But mind appeared
Mine doesn't require adjustment.
before they were in adjuster and well.
That's right. You see, on a planet like ours, you could have personality, have an adjutant from the Holy Spirit, and be a bona fide human being with no thought adjuster at all. You might never get a thought adjuster. Well, I'll check that out for you. Yeah.
Yeah, we after that in 2 weeks ago.
I'll check that out for you.
How would you have it?
Well, you couldn't work it tonight, or
No, he could worship pretty well. Let's just check back here, and we'll get the conditions of adjuster and dwelling on a pre-plan of, let's take 1187. Paragraph 5. Before the times of the pouring out of the Spirit of truth upon the inhabitants of an evolutionary world, the adjuster's bestowal appears to be determined by many spiritual influences and personality attitudes. We do not fully comprehend the laws governing such bestowals. We do not understand just what determines the release of the adjusters who have volunteered to indwell such evolving minds. That's exactly the condition we have here with Alabama County. But we do observe numerous influences and conditions which appear to be associated with the arrival of the adjusters in such minds prior to the bestowal of the Spirit of Truth, and they are. First, the assignment of personal seraphic guardians. Well, that wasn't the case here. I don't think. That could be wrong. 2, the attainment of the third circle of intellectual achievement. I know that
I don't believe that would happen.
3, upon the making of a supreme decision of unusual spiritual import. I'm not so darn sure that might not be involved. This decision to flee was a critical decision. 4, the spirit of brotherhood. No. Declaration of intention to do the will of God. No. Influence of the Supreme Being. Very possibly. Very possibly. The Supreme Being is concerned with totals. And this is the total human race on the planet right now. Yes. I would say, if I had to guess now, I would say it would be item number 3 and number 6. Could be involved there. I could be suspectful of the Supreme Being here.
There, I'm 6. And those
Correct.
views.
I'm wrong. Right.
No, they did fuse. They did fuse.
There are worlds where they never fuse. The mortals survive by a different technique, but our world went through in its early stages of development. People survived by 2 methods, adjuster fusion and spirit fusion. Not always did the adjusters come back. Now, since the bestowal of Jesus, it's universal adjuster bestowal. The part of it,
Well, I don't quite understand. You mean to say this fuse?
they fuse, yeah.
Oh, they fuse.
Mm-hmm.
Something not normal there.
But not all of their children did. Some of them made it by spirit fusion.
This goes back then, the husband, if they made that meeting, that the church was supposed to have the news to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They had already looked at the station.
Mm-hmm.
And after
Mm-hmm. Well, at this point, I think we're splitting the hairs down to angstrom units. I think they got their justice pretty soon. But I'm sure that the archangels wouldn't have been praying uselessly. 3 days after they started, I don't think they had them. But I bet
They might have been checking in at Obama.
I'm sure by the time that they had to go fire, they had them. When Father got the bird's nest.
Well, that's the thing that bothers me.
So,
That's a contradiction in the whole book
Is
that I
that
find.
resolved yourself to your total husband?
Well, I finally decided that I'm not taking it for a while when they're afraid.
But I just think that he was always thought about, some
Mm-hmm.
they have that personality.
I thought that the first part of any place is kind of a coming.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, you got
What happened? We never had them in the archangels didn't quite know it yet.
It says here on Jerusalem, Both Anne and Monsanto were refused of their thought of justice, as also were several of their children, including son Pat. But the majority of even their immediate descendants only achieved Syracuse. Well, you just can't make enough contact with the mind is too primitive. And still, this person has survival. And so, he wakes up on the First Nation world, but there's no justice there. The local universe mother spirit individualizes a portion of her shared nature, and that immediately fuses with that being. And that mortal then becomes a Syracuse descendant, whose destiny is all the different from us. No, but the being never gets moved.
It was the very first one.
Well, some did and some didn't. You're in the dividing line. Well, the justice don't confuse. The people have a justice, but they all move on to Syracuse and method.
Tabernacle was from Hagen
Hagen does it all. Yeah,
Potential.
that's right.